Mia stepped into the train station early in the morning. The air was cold, and her breath formed small clouds as she exhaled. She pulled her coat tighter around her and looked around. The station was busy with people rushing to catch their trains. There was the sound of announcements over the speakers and the noise of rolling suitcases on the floor. Mia felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had planned this trip for weeks, but now that it was happening, she couldn't help feeling a little anxious. She checked her ticket again, train 302 to Chicago, seat 16A. Walking to her platform, she noticed the smell of coffee coming from a small cafe nearby. The line was too long, so she decided to skip it. Her train was already waiting, and she didn't want to risk missing it. She climbed aboard and found her seat. It was a window seat, just as she liked. She placed her bag on the rack above her head and sat down. Outside the window, she could see people waving goodbye to loved ones. It made her smile. The train started to fill up with passengers. Some were talking on their phones, while others carried newspapers or books. Mia took out her own book but didn't open it yet. She enjoyed watching the people around her. Everyone seemed busy with their own thoughts. As the train's whistle blew, Mia leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the train begin to move, gently leaving the station. Mia opened her book and began to read, but she couldn't concentrate. The soft hum of the train and the occasional announcements filled the air. She glanced around the carriage, observing the passengers. Most people were quietly focused on their own activities. That's when she noticed him. A man, probably in his late 40s, entered the carriage and hesitated for a moment. He wore a dark coat, and his hat was pulled low over his eyes. He looked around, scanning the seats, and then walked slowly toward Mia's section. Mia tried not to stare, but there was something unusual about him. His movements were quick and deliberate, almost like he was in a hurry, but trying not to show it. He carried a small black suitcase in one hand, gripping it tightly as if it contained something very important. When he reached Mia's row, he stopped. "Excuse me," he said in a low voice. "Is this seat taken?" Mia looked at the seat beside her, then back at him. "No, it's free," she replied, offering a polite smile. "Thank you," he said, sitting down. He placed the suitcase on his lap and kept his hand on it. Mia returned to her book, but she couldn't stop glancing at him. He was nervous, tapping his fingers on the suitcase and looking out the window. A few minutes passed in silence. The man shifted in his seat as if he couldn't get comfortable. Then, out of nowhere, he turned to Mia. "Do you believe in destiny?" he asked. Mia blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm not sure," she said cautiously. "Why do you ask?" The man shrugged, looking down at the suitcase. "Sometimes things happen for a reason. Sometimes we meet people for a reason." Mia didn't know how to respond. She nodded politely, unsure of what to make of the strange conversation. As the train sped through the countryside, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. The train continued its journey through the countryside, the rhythmic sound of the wheels on the tracks filling the cabin. Mia tried to focus on her book again, but the man beside her kept drawing her attention. He was restless, glancing around nervously as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. Suddenly, he leaned closer to her. "I need your help," he whispered. His voice was urgent but quiet, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. Mia froze for a moment. "What kind of help?" she asked cautiously. He placed the black suitcase on the seat between them. "I have to leave," he said, his eyes darting toward the aisle. "I can't take this with me. Please keep it safe." Mia stared at the suitcase, confused and uneasy. "Wait, what?" "I don't even know you," she protested. The man stood up abruptly. "I don't have time to explain. Just trust me." "It's important," he said, gripping her shoulder lightly. "Please." Before Mia could respond, he hurried down the aisle, disappearing into the next carriage. Mia sat there, stunned, staring at the suitcase he had left behind. Her heart raced. What was inside it? Why couldn't he take it with him? She glanced around the carriage, wondering if anyone else had noticed the strange exchange. A few passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, but one man sitting diagonally across from her seemed to be watching her. Mia quickly looked away, feeling a wave of paranoia. Her curiosity about the suitcase grew. It was small but sturdy, with a combination lock on the front. It looked ordinary enough, but the way the man had acted made it seem anything but ordinary. "Should I open it?" she muttered to herself. But then she remembered the man's words, "Keep it safe." The train jolted slightly as it turned a corner, snapping Mia out of her thoughts. She reached out and touched the suitcase. It felt heavier than it looked. The man who had been watching her suddenly stood up and walked toward the restroom. Mia's unease deepened. Was he connected to the stranger? Was she being watched because of the suitcase? She pulled her bag from the overhead rack and placed it on her lap, covering the suitcase as best as she could. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it something dangerous? Was it illegal? Or was it just an innocent misunderstanding? Mia looked out the window, trying to calm herself, but the suitcase sitting beneath her bag seemed to demand her attention. She knew this train ride was far from ordinary now. Mia sat frozen in her seat, staring at the bag covering the mysterious suitcase. Her thoughts raced, each one more unsettling than the last. Should she tell the conductor? Should she open it? Should she leave it where it was and pretend she didn't know anything? She glanced around the carriage again. The man who had been watching her was still gone, and most of the other passengers seemed oblivious. A woman a few rows ahead was scrolling through her phone, and an older man was snoring softly near the back. Mia bit her lip. "I can't just leave it," she whispered to herself. "What if it's dangerous? But what if it's not?" She thought about the stranger's last words. "It's important. Please keep it safe." The urgency in his voice still echoed in her mind. He didn't seem like someone who would harm her. But then again, how could she be sure? The train jolted slightly, and the suitcase shifted under her bag. Mia jumped at the small movement, her nerves on edge. She reached out and adjusted her bag, her hands trembling slightly. What if it's nothing? She thought. It could just be clothes or papers. But another voice in her head argued, what if it's something illegal? What if I'm being set up? As she debated, the man who had been watching her returned to his seat. This time, his gaze was more direct, almost as if he knew what she was hiding. Mia quickly turned away, pretending to look out the window. The countryside blurred past, but Mia couldn't focus on the view. She felt trapped, As if the suitcase weighed more than just physical pounds, it carried a burden she didn't ask for. Her stomach churned as she made a decision. She would wait until the next stop. If the stranger didn't return by then, she'd find the conductor and explain everything. For now, all she could do was sit there, gripping her bag tightly and hoping the minutes would pass quickly. The train's whistle echoed in the distance, signaling the upcoming station. Mia's heart pounded as she glanced at the suitcase one more time. The next few moments would decide everything. The train slowed as it approached the station, its whistle echoing across the quiet countryside. Mia's heart raced. She glanced down at the suitcase under her bag. The stranger had been gone for what felt like forever. Surely he would return now, wouldn't he? Passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. Mia scanned the carriage nervously. The man who had been watching her stood up, stretched, and started walking toward the door. Her chest tightened as he glanced her way one last time before stepping off the train. Mia sighed in relief but quickly realized she was now truly alone with the suitcase. The stranger wasn't coming back, at least not yet. As the train resumed its journey, Mia made her decision. Her curiosity had grown too strong. She had to know what was inside. She carefully slid her bag off the suitcase and examined the combination lock. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's see what's so important." The lock was sturdy, but to her surprise, it wasn't secured. She clicked it open and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found several items that didn't seem to belong together. There was a thick folder filled with papers, a small notebook, and what appeared to be a folded map. But what caught her attention the most was a shiny silver device. It looked like some kind of high-tech gadget with buttons and a small screen. Mia frowned, picking up the notebook first. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, but they didn't make much sense. The writing was in English, but it was messy and filled with strange symbols and abbreviations. She flipped through the folder next. It contained official-looking documents, some stamped with seals and marked confidential. Her pulse quickened as she realized she might be holding something far more serious than she had imagined. Finally, she unfolded the map. It was old and detailed, with red circles drawn around several locations. Mia didn't recognize any of the names, but something about it felt significant. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud thud behind her. She quickly closed the suitcase and looked around. A train attendant had dropped a stack of trays in the corridor. He smiled apologetically and moved on. Mia exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. She glanced at the suitcase again. What had she gotten herself into? As the train sped through the countryside, she felt a growing sense of unease. Someone was bound to come looking for this suitcase and for her. Mia sat frozen, staring at the closed suitcase. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she had seen. The documents, the map, the strange device, none of it added up. And yet, every instinct told her that she was holding something important. As the train approached another station, she suddenly felt a presence near her. She looked up, and there he was, the stranger. He had returned. He stood in the aisle, his dark coat slightly wrinkled and his face tense. His eyes locked onto the suitcase immediately. Without a word, he walked to her row and sat down in the seat next to her. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. He reached for the suitcase and placed it on his lap, his grip tight. Mia felt a mix of relief and fear. "You just left it here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What is this all about?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the carriage as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then he leaned closer to Mia. "You did well," he whispered. "You didn't open it, did you?" Mia hesitated, her heart pounding. She thought about lying but decided against it. "I did," she admitted softly. The man's face didn't change. He simply nodded as if he had expected her answer. "Then you understand?" he said. "This is bigger than both of us?" Mia frowned, confused. "What do you mean? What is all of this?" He smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say you've done me a great favor today, and maybe you've done yourself one too." Before Mia could ask more questions, the man stood up again, holding the suitcase tightly. "Use this with wisdom," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're more important than you think." And just like that, he was gone. He walked quickly down the aisle and disappeared into the next carriage, leaving Mia sitting there, bewildered and full of questions. The train continued its journey, but for Mia, the ride felt far from over. Mia stared out the window as the train sped toward its final destination. Her reflection looked back at her, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. "Use this with wisdom. You're more important than you think." She replayed the events over and over, trying to make sense of them. Who was that man? Why had he trusted her with something so mysterious? And what exactly was in that suitcase? As the train approached Chicago, passengers began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave. Mia stayed seated for a moment longer, watching the city skyline grow larger in the distance. She felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. When the train finally came to a stop, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and stepped onto the platform. The cold air hit her face, waking her from her thoughts. People hurried past her, heading toward taxis or loved ones waiting to greet them. Mia lingered for a moment, looking around as if expecting to see the stranger again. But he was gone, vanished as quickly as he had appeared. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and started walking. As she moved through the bustling station, her mind kept returning to the suitcase, the map, the strange device. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning of something bigger. Mia smiled faintly as she stepped outside into the busy streets of Chicago. The world around her seemed different now, as if it held secrets she had yet to uncover. And deep down, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Now that we've finished Mia's story, let's practice together. This activity will help you use some of the words and phrases we learned today. I'll say a sentence, and you repeat after me. Let's practice. Excuse me, is this seat taken? Keep it safe. Use this with wisdom. Now imagine you're Mia and someone asks, "Can you help me?" What would you say? Write your response in the comments below. Here's a challenge for you. What would you do if a stranger gave you a suitcase and left? Would you open it, or would you tell someone? Answer using phrases like, "I would," or "I might." Great job today! In Mia's story, we explored how to use polite expressions like "excuse me" and phrases to offer or request help, such as "Can you help me?" or "Keep it safe." These are everyday phrases that you can use in real-life situations. Remember, learning English is like Mia's journey on the train. Step by step, you'll discover more and grow more confident. Don't be afraid to practice, make mistakes, and try again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Next time, we'll explore another exciting story to help you learn even more English. Keep practicing and remember, every small effort makes a big difference. See you in the next story.